I'm very pleased to welcome Tamila Varyvoda, who is a medical student here at McGill, and she recently completed a research internship with Dr. Eisenberg on vaping cessation. And so we're very happy to welcome you today in our department and hear about your work.
Thank you so much. It's nice to be back here after an exciting summer experience doing research with Dr. Eisenberg and his team. And my role in that team was to conduct this systematic review and meta-analysis of randomized controlled trials, which we titled Efficacy and Safety of Verenicline for Vaping Cessation. We can start. To begin, I have no conflicts of interest or financial incentives to declare. For the next 15 to 20 minutes, I would like to loosely go over the introduction, results, discussion, and conclusion sections of my paper. But most importantly, I want to convey to you the urgency of developing quitting strategies tailored to vaping and insist on just how serious of a public health challenge it is. To start, let's go over some background information necessary for understanding the evidence of the selected randomized trials. What are e-cigarettes? Also referred to in literature as electronic cigarettes or vapes, they are defined as handheld battery-operated devices that heat a liquid containing nicotine, propylene glycol, glycerin, and flavorings that produces an aerosol so that individuals can inhale it. Basically, they are nicotine delivery devices engineered to initiate and sustain addiction. The number of individuals using them globally surpassed 110 million in 2023 and is projected to increase even more. I want to note before moving on that the act of vaping is not to be confused with the act of smoking, which I will only refer to when I'm speaking of cigarette use. Vaping is generally perceived to be safer than smoking. However, its long-term health effects remain unknown because of its short history and swift rise in popularity. Rest assured, research is ongoing to definitively establish links between e-cigarette use and adverse health effects on the lungs, the heart, and other organ systems. Most recently, worrying levels of toxic metallic elements and carcinogens were detected in popular e-liquids and aerosols. Such preliminary findings are accumulating and help fuel interest in vaping cessation. So you might ask yourself, then why am I not hearing about successful abstinence stories left and right? Is there a lack of motivation in the people that use vapes habitually? I'm here to tell you that not at all. Polling has been conducted and determined that an encouraging amount of adolescents, young adults, and older individuals are wishing to put an end to their dependence. Yet, unlike for smoking cessation, there still is no one quitting strategy tailored to vaping that has been formally established. That is where we believe Verenicline comes into play. It is an FDA-approved medication known to be both effective and safe for smoking cessation. Patients start with a gradual dose increase over 1 week, then take the medication twice daily for a total of 12 weeks. At the molecular level, Verenicline acts as a partial agonist of the alpha-4 beta-2 nicotinic acetylcholine receptor, the same receptor to which nicotine binds to stimulate dopamine release in the brain. This pathway is what makes nicotine use produce feelings of stress relief, increased alertness, and improved mood, but also what drives the development of dependence. Thankfully, this exact pathway is blocked by Verenicline, which reduces the rewarding effects of nicotine and makes quitting easier overall. Verenicline's effect for vaping cessation has already been evaluated by randomized controlled trials. However, the number of trials remains limited and their findings are somewhat heterogeneous. Notably, these studies have included younger participants than traditional smoking cessation studies and have reported novel safety outcomes. Given this emerging evidence, our team decided to answer the overarching question. Among individuals who currently use e-cigarettes daily or near daily, what is the effect of Verenicline treatment compared to placebo on vaping abstinence and on safety outcomes? To conduct our systematic review and meta-analysis, we followed a rigorous and transparent methodology. Following PRISMA, PRESS, and Cochrane guidelines, we carried out comprehensive searches of 3 databases, Medline, Embase, and the Cochrane Library, from the year 2004 to June 2025. We aim to capture only randomized controlled trials evaluating Verenicline versus placebo in individuals of any age using vapes habitually. Using the very helpful Cochrane software, a second reviewer and I independently screened titles and abstracts of captured publications using predefined inclusion and exclusion criteria. Then we independently reviewed the full text, and afterwards we also independently extracted all of the data. At any times, if there was a conflict, a third reviewer helped us resolve it by consensus. Also, when extracting the data, we used the intention to treat principle, which means that even if during a trial some participants dropped out, and that is very common in smoking and vaping cessation trials, we still analyzed the data as if all participants remained in the trial. Our primary outcome was vaping abstinence, measured using a hierarchical approach that prioritized the most rigorous measure. At the top of this hierarchy was biochemically validated continuous abstinence and maximum follow-up. At the bottom, self-reported 7-day point prevalence abstinence and maximum follow-up. We use this approach because trials differ in the way that they measure abstinence. Some verify nicotine use with biochemical testing, like saliva cotinine testing, while others rely simply on self-reported online surveys. Likewise, some assess continuous abstinence, which means not having vaped from baseline until the end of the trial, whereas others simply measure how over the past 7 days vaping was not done and restart on a weekly basis. Some trials, which we were very grateful for, provided both. Our secondary outcomes include the same 7-day point prevalence and continuous abstinence measures, but at different time points. While safety outcomes focused on overall adverse event occurrence, serious adverse event occurrence, and also specific neuropsychiatric and gastrointestinal adverse effects. We assessed quality of our trials using the Cochrane risk of bias tool, but all trials, regardless of ranking, were included in the analysis. For synthesis, we used RevMan software and conducted random effects meta-analyses with inverse variance weighing, pooling risk ratios of 95%, confidence intervals. And to account for between study variability, we applied the Jackson and modified Knapp Hartring extensions. And for assessing heterogeneity, we used both the I-squared and the tau-squared statistics. Finally, we screened a total of 154 studies. We retrieved 12 for full text review, and in the end, only 3 randomized controlled trials met all eligibility criteria to be included in our systematic review and meta-analysis. The first trial, Evans et al., and the second trial, Caponetto et al., were highly similar in design. Participants were randomized to Verenicline or placebo for 12 weeks and were followed up for an additional 12 weeks, totaling 24 weeks of follow-up. Their vaping abstinence outcomes were ascertained with a saliva cotinine test. The 2 trials mainly differed in the fact that Evans et al. Was conducted in the US, whereas Caponetto et al. Was conducted in Italy. What I found most interesting about the Evans et al. Trial is that they recruited participants as young as 16, offering valuable insight into how effective and safe Verenicline is in a younger population. What stood out to me the most about the Caponetto et al. Trial is that they recruited specifically former smokers that had transitioned to e-cigarettes. The third and final trial, Fucito et al., was a pilot trial and therefore had a much smaller sample size than the other 2. Participants only took Verenicline for 8 weeks and were followed up for an additional 4 weeks after discontinuing treatment, totaling 12 weeks of follow-up. The trialists did not use saliva cotinine testing to verify abstinence outcomes, but rather asked participants to fill out weekly online surveys. This is why this trial, unlike the other 2, was considered to be at a high risk of bias during our quality assessment. Indeed, participants could misreport their abstinence outcomes either intentionally or not, and the trialists would have no way of finding out. Across the 3 trials, 178 participants were randomized to Verenicline and 177 to placebo. The mean age of participants ranged from 24 to 56 to 54, 21 to 54 years, and the proportion of males from 46 to 51%. The overall pooled risk ratio for our primary outcome, which was vaping abstinence at maximum follow-up using the most rigorous criterion reported, was 2.20. As you can see, the confidence interval is wide and does include no difference. However, when you look at the numerical data, Verenicline consistently produced higher abstinence rates than placebo. There was not a single outcome where Verenicline showed no benefit or performed worse than placebo. Looking at 7-day point prevalence abstinence, we found much clearer results. At the end of treatment, Verenicline more than doubled abstinence rates, and this benefit compared to placebo persisted at maximum follow-up. So again, no difference is not included in this interval. Continuous abstinence, which was only reported in the Evans and Caponetto et al. Trials, was also seen at higher rates with Verenicline compared to placebo at both end of treatment and maximum follow-up. On the safety side, Verenicline was not shown to increase any adverse events compared with placebo at maximum follow-up. The most commonly reported side effects in the Verenicline arms were insomnia, abnormal dreams, and nausea. These are well-documented side effects of Verenicline, which usually are mild and transient. Serious adverse events were rare. Most of them were unrelated to treatment, and no deaths occurred across all 3 trials. Taken together, our findings suggest that Verenicline is safe and shows promise for vaping cessation, though larger trials, preferably those using biochemical validation and longer follow-ups, are needed to confirm its efficacy. Our findings should be considered in light of the broader evidence base. A Cochrane systematic review, which was published earlier this year, assessed a variety of behavioral and pharmacological interventions for vaping cessation. The authors concluded with low certainty that Verenicline may improve vaping cessation outcomes compared to placebo, but they could not pool safety data or efficacy data because at the time only 2 trials reported their findings. Our meta-analysis pooled 3 trials, the newest being Evans et al., and that allowed us to examine both safety and efficacy more comprehensively. That being said, establishing Verenicline's efficacy did not come without its challenges. The pilot trial by Fucito et al., with only 40 participants, reported inconclusive findings due to wide intervals. We believe it may be attributable to the shortened 8-week Verenicline course that was implemented. It was also the only RCT that met our inclusion criteria, but did not use biochemical validation and did not report continuous abstinence, which we considered the most rigorous measure. We believe that any future trial on Verenicline for vaping cessation should adopt the 12-week course, which has been established as the most efficacious duration in smoking cessation research. Extended treatment beyond the 12 weeks may also benefit individuals that have a greater difficulty quitting, and we believe that warrants further investigation. Safety is another key consideration. Like most medication, Verenicline comes with its side effects, and like I told you, the most common in our analysis were insomnia, abnormal dreams, and nausea. These are mild. They typically resolve once you stop the medication and are already well documented. There is some evidence even that genetic variation may influence susceptibility of individuals to these effects. For example, one genetic-wide association study linked polymorphisms in a gene called the ICAM5 gene to increase susceptibility to abnormal dreams in people taking Verenicline for smoking cessation. Insomnia and other central nervous system related effects may involve similar genetic pathways, though more research is needed to confirm this. Nausea also has shown potential genetic associations, but its assessment is complicated by individual differences in perception, reporting, and tolerance. Verenicline was not associated with a higher risk of serious adverse event occurrence in our meta-analysis and in large-scale smoking cessation trials, such as the EAGLES trial, which is a famous trial that reported comparable rates of serious adverse events to nicotine patches or placebo. Another meta-analysis of nearly 11,000 participants likewise found no increased risk of suicide, suicidal ideation, or depression in participants taking varenicline versus placebo. Still, most participants in these smoking cessation trials are older than the typical person that uses e-cigarettes. For this reason, varenicline is not yet approved for use by those who are under 16, and its safety profile in adolescents and young adults remains a field that requires careful study. This is especially important because this age group is aggressively targeted by marketing strategies devised by vaping companies. And that brings us to the bigger picture. The global vaping market is now valued at nearly 30 billion US dollars. In 2017, e-cigarettes overtook cigarettes as the main product that introduces adolescents to nicotine use. Their design, compact, discreet, flavored with enticing fruits and other enticing flavors, and the fact that they're so easy to use makes them uniquely accessible and easy to overuse. Many young people start vaping out of curiosity or peer influences, often without anticipating long-term dependence. But repeated rituals like grabbing your vape first thing in the morning or during a stressful period reinforces both the habit and the addiction. While vaping is often perceived as harm reduction compared to smoking cigarettes, this narrative primarily benefits the companies that are selling the product. These same companies are owned by the larger corporations that in the past suppressed evidence that linked cancer, lung cancer, to smoking. So one can see how a lack of industry-funded cessation research is reflective of larger economic priorities. At the same time, evidence is emerging about the vaping-related health risks and is motivating a number of individuals to quit. And I'm happy to say that the larger studies that we need to assist them are underway. Upon review of clinicaltrials.gov, an RCT led by Dr. Lisa Fucito, which is the principal investigator of that pilot trial that I mentioned before, is currently recruiting adults who exclusively use vapes and wish to quit. This trial will have a larger sample size of 326 participants, a full 12-week course of varenicline, and a follow-up of 26 weeks. The trialists of another trial, the Avenue study, are also recruiting approximately 500 participants who use both cigarettes and vapes. They aim to compare the effectiveness of varenicline versus nicotine patches in promoting abstinence over a 52-week period. These larger, longer-term trials will be critical in clarifying whether varenicline's promising signal can translate into durable, long-term efficacy. Finally, while varenicline shows clear potential, its true value may lie in combination approaches. Smoking cessation trials have already proven that integrating pharmacotherapy with behavioral support produces the most strong outcomes. For people who vape, especially for adolescents and young adults, whose dependence is reinforced by peer pressure, unhealthy coping strategies, or social triggers, this dual approach could be transformative. Indeed, addressing just the psychological side of dependence is not enough. Addressing the biology and the psychological side is crucial. This calls for creative combined strategies, such as pairing varenicline with text messaging support, peer-driven support, or novel nicotine alternatives like nicotine toothpicks. This could very well be the key into turning promising results into durable public health impact. Our study had several potential limitations. First, the included trials did not all measure abstinence in the same way. Biochemical validation was reported by the Evans et al. And Caponetto et al. Trials, but not in the Fucito et al. Trial. To address this, we implemented a hierarchical approach, giving priority to the most rigorous criterion. Second, the trials themselves slightly varied in size, treatment duration, follow-up length, and the level of behavioral support provided. While this variability introduces noise, we believe it could also reflect the reality of clinical practice and therefore improve generalizability. Third, we observed moderate heterogeneity in our pooled analysis, specifically in our primary outcome and for adverse events. But with only 3 trials, we could not explore sources of heterogeneity through meta-regression. And finally, for the same reason, we were unable to formally assess publication bias. So, to conclude, Verenicline is safe and holds real promise as a treatment for vaping cessation. Across 3 randomized trials, the direction of effect is consistent, and the safety profile mirrors what we already know from smoking cessation research. The uncertainty that you might have seen today reflects small sample sizes and varied outcome definitions, more than a lack of signal. As larger, longer studies will come online, especially those using biochemical validation and pairing medication with thoughtful behavioral supports, we will be able to say with greater confidence who benefits the most and how to sustain abstinence. For now, this message is cautious optimism. Verenicline is a credible option with comprehensive quit plans, and the evidence is moving in the right direction. My hope is that with this work, I will help more people move towards wanting to quit and actually have a safe, evidenced path to do so. Thank you. Questions are welcome. If anyone has any, you can drop them in the chat or ask them in person.
Thank you, Tamila. This was a great presentation.
Thank you. Yes.
So you said what's your next step? What are you doing next?
Currently, we're working on perfecting the paper, reworking the draft so that it's ready for publication. And hopefully we will publish in something that has a high impact so it can reach the greatest number of people, because we would be the first to meta-analyze the 3 trials. Because to meta-analyze a topic, you need at least 3. So because the Evans et al. Trial was published this spring, we immediately took the task to resume the evidence, and now that can help people. Okay, we have this evidence that Verenicline shows promise. Now investors are more likely to give money for the trials and to progress the research.
Second one too. Why
Of
do you
course.
think people who are quitting cigarettes switch to vapes?
I think for now, vapes are regarded as a tool for smoking cessation. I think even our lab conducts research to see if vapes do help people quit smoking. But there's always a risk that when you introduce someone to vapes and you suggest that they switch over, they begin using both, which at that point they're getting subjected to adverse events from both products. And just overall, vapes have a lot of advantages compared to smoking. The fact that they don't stink, they're much more discreet. They have that cool factor for the younger population, and also the fact that they're continuous. Like a cigarette, you have to go outside, you have to have a lighter on you, you have to start it and you have to end it and go back. Whereas a vape, like you can use it all the time. It ends in a month, but then you just buy a new one and start again. So for a lot of people who are very addicted, this is like a great thing for them.
Are the nicotine levels comparable?
Yes. People approximately use the same amount of nicotine if they smoke or if they vape, but because vapes are continuous, we can't really control. So some days people might use them more, and then at that point they're consuming more nicotine than if they would have just smoked like a pack a day.
Thank you.
No problem. Any more questions?
Did you see whether these studies included or excluded people who were also vaping in THC?
The Evans et al. Trial, the newest one, did collect data on whether or not people used other substances like THC, whether it was through joints, edibles, or vaped, and alcohol. And there was like a small percentage, it was about 6-7% of their participants that used other substances. But overall, the other two studies kind of excluded everyone who used anything other than vapes. And overall, there was not really in these three studies there was not really participants that after Verenicline decided to also pick up vaping THC. Or I think there was one trial and there was one person who after even the Verenicline treatment started smoking and vaping at the same time, but that was it. Yeah.
Are there any questions from Zoom?
I see one question in the chat from David Laplante. Is there any research on maintenance doses following 12-week treatment protocol? I'm not sure exactly what maintenance doses means. There is research about extending the 12-week protocol to maybe 18 weeks or 24 weeks for people who really struggle with quitting, but that was always conducted for smoking cessation in the past. And the data is a bit varied. Some research shows that it greatly benefits people, but then meta-analyses of all of the research available show that the signal is not that strong. But that's why, like in my presentation, I did say like we need to further investigate this, and it would be interesting to see if for vaping cessation it's different, because although smoking and vaping are related, they're slightly different. But Verenicline is usually a medication that you take for 12 weeks, you get off it, and by that point, you got rid of the habit of having to go for a cigarette. You don't really remember the benefits of nicotine because the pathways in the brain were blocked. And so you don't really need Verenicline after the 12-week treatment. Yes.
If you were like in a perfect world to create a trial for people from 16 to like 25 and had all the resources available, what would you do to get the best
I think for that kind of trial, that's actually the exact age of the population that Evans et al. Used, 16 to 25. I think that their approach was really great, and honestly, I would draw a lot of inspiration from them, because the thing with smoking and vaping cessation trials is it is still a little bit of a taboo subject in society, and so there is a high rate of dropout in these studies. People like they really want to quit, and then they fail, and they think, well, they feel a sense of shame, and so they stop like reaching out to the researchers, and we lose a lot of people to follow up. And so what Evans et al. Did is that they gave like monetary compensation. So they paid people to show up and give data. And they had some of the highest retention rates compared to the other two trials. I think also I like the approach that Caponetto et al. Used, which was to go to college campuses. And I feel like there, a lot of the people are more open to participating in research. Like even myself, I'm at McGill, I'm subscribed to the newsletter, and whenever there's like some research project going on, they give out a $5 gift card. I'm like, why not? I'll do it. It takes 5 minutes. So I feel like going to places where academia is already like introduced, it'll be much easier to recruit motivated participants that will keep showing up every week. Whereas other studies before, they would usually go to like smoking cessation helplines or help groups, where that's people who are usually not as motivated, like they're struggling to quit, and so they might feel more ashamed that they haven't succeeded. But yeah, there's another question in the chat. What do you think about potential recurrence after the treatment? Do you think that without controlling the social conditions of addiction to smoking, we will succeed in using this treatment? That's a really great question. I actually asked myself that during like the writing process of my discussion. I think just from from reviewing the literature while writing and just from personal experience, being a university student, seeing people vape on campus, having friends who vape, um, I think that although vaping and smoking, in research, it's very compared. People do say that you're equally dependent on nicotine from vaping or smoking, that you consume the same amount. I do think that there's like key differences in the products themselves. And I think that it's much more rare that a person wakes up first thing in the morning and takes a lighter out in their bedroom and lights a cigarette. But it is extremely common for people to sleep with their vape under their pillow so that as soon as they wake up, they can grab it and hit it. And also, as I mentioned in the statistic before, the way adolescents are introduced to nicotine is now through vapes. It's no longer cigarettes. It used to be a cigarette in the back of the yard at school, but now it's vapes at dépanneur or from your peers. And so, considering that, I think that just giving them medication, especially adolescents who are often rebellious and they don't want to take your medication, that could not be it. That could be not enough for a lot of the population. And so I would ideally, if I were to conduct my ideal trial, I would combine both medication and behavioral support. So that would be maybe counseling sessions. I really do like the program that I mentioned. This is quitting, which they now go by X program, but it's basically people who have previously succeeded to quit vaping. They enroll into this program and they text other people who are currently trying to quit suggestions. They coach them. They tell them, you got this, like you can do it. They give really motivating quotes. And the reason that this program works is that people who currently vape and want to quit are more likely to listen to those who succeeded and who know what it is like to vape than a doctor who they see as like someone who's maybe less knowledgeable about the culture of vaping. Yeah. There's also like new nicotine products coming out recently, like nicotine pouches, but those are considered a nicotine product, kind of like vapes. There's also nicotine toothpicks that I mentioned. They're not FDA approved yet, but they could also be a potential interesting cessation tool because from like asking people on campus when I was doing my research, a lot of people, it's like an oral fixation. It's like snacking, like mindlessly snacking is the same thing. You just want to have something like eating gum. So for a lot of people, quitting nicotine is not even the biggest issue, that they like having an object that they can use in stressful situations to cope. And so a toothpick with a lower dose of nicotine could kind of serve like the nicotine patch for smokers. Yeah. Okay, I don't see any. Oh, I see another question. Okay, from Yana. In your research, was there any indication that a certain age group is more or less open to taking medication to help with cessation? How does that affect the effectiveness of approaches to cessation? Does the behavioral part play a bigger part? Does the behavioral part play a bigger part for certain demographics? So I would like to go back to maybe the table where I show my data. Yeah, this table. So definitely these two trials, the Evans trial, which was 16 to 25-year-olds, and the Fuchito trial, they had an average age also of like 21. Whereas the Caponetta trial that recruited the former smokers who switched to e-cigarettes, their average age was 50. This is a trial that had older participants compared to these two. And if we look at the rates, in all three trials, they decrease from right as you end the medication, you have the highest 51% succeeded in abstaining from vaping. But as time goes on, there's always a drop. But if we look at the drop here in the older people, it goes from 40 to 34, whereas the more younger crowd, it's kind of, this one is a really small trial, so it's not great. But here's like 51 to 28. This is a bit anecdotal because there's not a lot of trials and I'm comparing two trials, which is not great. But I do believe that with a younger crowd, it's it might be harder to help them encourage them to quit because they haven't lived long enough with the addiction to experience the health adverse events, which are usually the biggest motivator for older individuals who maybe already developed like a chronic cough or lung pain. And at that point, it's the will to live and to live longer, to see their grandchildren, etc., that motivates them to quit. Whereas younger populations, usually they have that fallacy. You should quit now before you experience the chronic effects. All right. I think that was all the questions that we have today.
Good place to conclude
Yes.
the presentation. It was excellent.
Yes, it was
Thank you
great.
so
Thank you.
much.